This is Kate Swoboda, creator of YourCourageousLife.com, director of the Courageous Living Coach certification at TeamCLCC.com, and author of the book, The Courage Habit, which is available at booksellers and at Amazon. The Your Courageous Life podcast is all about going after what you want and creating and living a more courageous, emotionally resilient life. Might drop a couple of F-bombs, so maybe don't listen with your kids in the backseat of the car. And here we go with today's episode. Hey everyone, and welcome to, amazingly, what is the 100th episode of the Your Courageous Life podcast. I am surprised myself that there are 100 episodes. I got to be honest with you, because I consider myself to be first and foremost a writer. So when I decided to start doing the Your Courageous Life podcast, it was always with a very tight written outline at the beginning. And I just was like, I'll do some episodes. I'll see how this goes. And then I ended up finding that I really liked it. And particularly, I think the thing I have loved the most about being able to record the podcast is to communicate more of the tone that I intend when I'm very direct. Because I'm so aware that if you read something on my website, like your life is your responsibility, it might, depending on the person and where they're at and their mood, come across as if I'm saying something like, your life is your responsibility, as if, carrying a tone of like, what's wrong with you that you can't get it together, which is not how I intend that to ever come across. I just intend it as a very simple fact. Your life is your responsibility. And an invitation. Your life is your responsibility. How cool is this? You are sovereign around this. You get to choose. You get to decide how you want to craft it, how you want to create it. You get to decide what you want to believe about who you are. You get to decide what you want to believe about what you're capable of. And this is, of course, never to say that there aren't very real external challenges, systemic barriers, limitations that life can present to us, but we are always the ones individually who get to decide how much we will buy into that idea that something will always be a limitation. And this is an idea that I love to play with regularly in my own life. But I'm so aware, and of course I've been on the receiving end of it too before, where I maybe for whatever reason just was not in a place to receive someone's direct feedback or something like that, and the words landed in such a way as if I thought they were chastising me. And so that's been my favorite part of this podcast, is realizing that in a way that I can't necessarily always communicate it through just written words on a website or even in a book, like my book, The Courage Habit, I can communicate a tone that hopefully, obviously I can't always control how it's received, but that hopefully is received as one that is direct yet empathetic. And so here we are, 100 episodes, and what I want to talk about, because I gave this a lot of thought, like what should the 100th episode be about? And by the way, it's 100 episodes legitimately. I've seen a few people start podcasts and they number their episodes in season 1, starting at like episode 101 to make it look as if they're a long established podcast. And I think that helps with like marketing algorithms and things like that. But that is not what I've done. There's an episode number 1 here. So 100 episodes, here we are. What did I want this to be about? And I thought I would really like this episode to be about how to give yourself a life reset. And I am recording this in the context of at the time that I'm recording this, it's 2021. It's summertime of 2021. There are some very promising pandemic-related notes on the horizon around vaccinations and life coming back to being fully open again. And of course, that doesn't mean that it's over. There's also a lot of pain. There's also a terrible toll that the pandemic is taking, particularly in underdeveloped countries that have less infrastructure, fewer resources, far less privilege. And I want to acknowledge that. And I also feel that it has been important to say that because I've seen this, I've felt it, I know other people have felt it too, this kind of comparisonitis of one another's pain. And this feeling of, I shouldn't be struggling so much because I don't have it as bad as this other person, is so unhelpful. So at the same time that it is never far from my mind that there are people in the world who suffer, and it is also never far in my mind that I am incredibly lucky. And anybody who has access to the technology and the time to be able to listen to a podcast right now, you are incredibly lucky. We are incredibly lucky and privileged. And at the same time, there has to be some level of compassion and awareness that what we have walked through together in 2020 and then on into 2021 has been hard. And your hard might be different than somebody else's hard, but it has been hard. And there's a part of me that just goes, fuck the comparisons. I'm not doing that. I'm not playing that game. I mean, I would say to all of us, do you believe in treating one another with kindness and compassion? What's your answer to that question? Do you believe in treating one another with kindness and compassion? And I hope your answer to that question is yes. And if the answer to that question for you is yes, then beautiful. Get ready to A, stop judging other people if they are having a hard time, but they should, air quotes, shouldn't be because they have such and such circumstances that they're so lucky to have, because that's not kind, nor is it compassionate. Someone else's hard time is relative. It's relative to their circumstances. It's relative to their emotional capacity. It's relative to their skill set for how they can navigate difficult scenarios. And your skill set might be more developed, which might mean when you look at them, you're like, how are they having a hard time with that? They have this, this, and this. Yeah, but their skill set, their capacity, etc., might be different than yours. So that's one. Let's stop judging other people. And here's two. Let's stop judging ourselves. Let's stop judging ourselves. How about that? How about that be the thing that comes out of this experience? That we can stop judging how we are handling things and instead put our focus on how do I want to handle things? Because it seems to me that when we know how we want to be handling something and then we aren't, spending time judging ourselves for the fact that we haven't met that mark is just a detour. And I will also just share that we can have compassion for ourselves even in the fact that we sometimes judge ourselves for not doing it better. Does that make sense? Like, we're going really meta here. So let's not judge other people. Let's have kindness and compassion towards other people. Let's not judge ourselves. Let's have kindness and compassion towards ourselves because we're doing the best we can moment to moment to moment. And then let's also not judge ourselves for the places where we can't, because of some reason or another, treat ourselves with kindness and compassion. Maybe that's a limitation or a lacking skill set that you have right now. And we all have those places. There are places in my life where I'm like, yeah, I'm not even going to go there with judging myself for that. I know I did the best I could. What are you going to do? And then there are other places in my life where absolutely that inner critic voice kicks up. And for some people, the inner critic is not a voice in the head. It's more of a sensation, a hyper arousal of discomfort. And when that kicks up, however your inner critic kicks up, sure, I'm just like you. We're all alike. I have those places where it kicks up and it's like, I can be so hard on myself. Even though I know all the things, even though if any of you were standing in front of me right now with tears in your eyes, beating up on yourself, all I would want to do is just hold you and hug you and say, I get it. I'm sorry that you're stuck in this. I know how that feels. You are good. You are whole. And there's the human experience. So let's get into this concept of how to reset your life. And by reset your life, I was trying to think of metaphors here. And the most obvious one that jumped forward for me was rebooting your computer. the Control-Alt-Delete. Let's reboot the computer. And then within a few minutes, the computer does whatever the computers do that whenever they reboot. Don't ask me, clearing a cache or clearing out RAM or something. And then they function better on the reboot. And that's a great handy metaphor in some ways. Like it's a good one, I think, when you're like, okay, hold on, this situation's really overwhelming. Let me reboot. Take a deep breath. All right, new moment, let me refocus. And that's, I think, an appropriate metaphor there. But here's the thing. We've been walking through this for over a year now. I don't think this is a reboot. I don't think this is a let's just clear the cache and then da-da-da-da-da. This experience has changed us, and it's changed us all in profound ways. And in some ways, it's changed us for the better. And in some ways, it has changed us for the worse. I think we need to just call a thing a thing. There are parts of us, if we look for them, that have probably been profoundly moved by people's kindness and humanity. And then there are parts of us, and sometimes I would say I've had days where I feel like, God, wow. But there have been parts of all of us that I've heard from so many people that have become profoundly disillusioned with humanity. And I know I've had those days too, like, Jesus Christmas, you can't just wear a stupid piece of cloth in a store, even if you don't think it works. Fine, you don't think it works, just wear it, because the scientists are saying that it's not a major inconvenience. Like, we're all more inconvenienced when a highway is shut down and we have to take a detour that takes 20 minutes. It's just a stupid piece of cloth, however you feel about it. Just, if there's a mask mandate, wear it. That has been like the internal voice of my own frustration and disillusionment in my head. And that is coupled with, and oh, this is hard when somebody else's value system is different than our own, isn't it? Who do I want to be? And if I actually want to be someone who doesn't judge other people and who treats other people with kindness and compassion, how will I do that even with the people I disagree with? How will I walk my talk to that level? Because if I'm not willing to walk my talk to that level, if my definition of treating myself or others with kindness and compassion is really only as relevant as I agree with their value system or they agree with mine, then it's all performative. You might as well just cross-stitch that shit on a pillow or put a scripty little quote on Instagram. Walking the talk is more important. So here we are, and we have walked through this experience for the past year, and now I'm talking about how do we reset our lives, because I think a reset is necessary for most of us. A reset is not about the reboot metaphor of taking out the trash or kind of clearing something out so that you can start anew, because there are things we do actually need to continue to take with us. Just as for instance, the very necessary yet painful reckoning of racial injustice is something we need to take with us. We need to keep our eye on that ball. And so when I was thinking about metaphors, the one that came to me as being more appropriate was replanting. So when you actually, and I am not a botanist, okay? So I'm sure that those of you who have a degree in science around botany and plants and all that, you're going to be like, okay, Kate, you're getting very reductive, and I would agree with you. But here's what I understand about the basic mechanics of when you repot a plant. If you take, or if you just take a plant out of the ground and put it in a new environment, it is actually somewhat traumatic to that plant. You're tearing roots that are established out of the soil. You're putting that plant in new soil that might have a new pH, that might have new microbes. And at first, for that plant, it needs delicate care. It needs, depending on the plant, of course, but let's just go through a couple options, maybe extra water, extra, I don't know, Miracle Grow or eggshells and coffee, like all the plant gardener people, you're like, this is what you do. You know what I'm talking about. Plants need additional tending when they are first repotted. That's when they are most fragile. They're alive and they can continue to live, but when they are in a new environment, that's when there's a sense of evaluation going on. And we're learning all the time more and more about cellular intelligence and plant intelligence. Did anybody, it was like maybe a year or so ago, I'm sure if you search on NPR, there was an interview with the guy who wrote the book about how trees actually talk to one another through their roots. Trees actually can communicate with one another through roots, which is just staggering and mind-blowing, all the things there are in this universe to discover. But okay, so we've got this plant and it is alive when you take it up out of the ground or the pot. And then it is still alive when you put it in the new ground or the new pot. But it needs some time to get its roots established. And particularly if we go with the metaphor of a pot, sometimes a plant outgrows the pot that it is planted in and needs to be repotted in a larger pot that has fresh soil and more room for the roots to take hold. So that is the metaphor I'd like us to take with us into this conversation about how to reset your life. That it's not about erasing the old and starting with a totally blank slate. It's not about throwing out the trash, because not all of what we've walked through in the past year or so is trash. I mean, aren't you more resilient than you were? Now, I'm not saying you liked it. I'm not saying I'm grateful for coronavirus. I'm not. Somebody else who's more evolved than me can be grateful. I'm not grateful for coronavirus. But if coronavirus has to happen, because I can't control whether or not it does, I am grateful for the increased resilience that I have. I am grateful that there will be this touchstone, and I say this with something of a smile on my face, but also it's kind of like still a little ridiculous, how much more I know I can walk through. I mean, come on, like I have walked through, this is just me personally, I have walked through moving to a new state in the middle of a pandemic and finding out that I did not like that state or living there, and then moving again to yet another state in less than a year. Anybody who's not a longtime listener of the podcast, I left California in May of 2020, moved to Texas, didn't like Texas, and bailed on Texas after less than a year. And as I record this now, I am in Fort Collins, Colorado. And I've only been here a week, and I gotta say, I'm enjoying myself immensely, but time will tell. But hey, if I can do that with a 6-year-old, oh yeah, and my husband's job was temporarily furloughed, and we had a family member who caught COVID, and if I can do all that, if I can walk through all that, I'm probably gonna be okay if like somebody on the internet criticizes me. I'm probably gonna be okay if like, I'm just trying to think of like the hard things to walk through in life. They usually, for me at least, have to do with somebody not liking something I've said or a friend that's upset with me. That's always hard. Conflict with people, that's hard for me. So what are the things that you're not throwing out the trash, because you do want to carry some things with you, and there's wisdom in those roots. Those roots did grow in the soil that they were in. And hopefully now you're ready for a larger pot. But it's scary when you first get transplanted to that new pot. It's like, hold on a minute. What's going on? What is this new world? What is safe and what is not? How much can I trust my surroundings? How much can I trust the people around me who I am hoping will care for me? And as part of this reset, by the way, this might stir up a lot of old stuff for people. I think the pandemic did that for a lot of people. I remember talking with a friend about this, that when the pandemic was first starting and the Trump administration was treating it like it was nothing, even though the mounting evidence was that it was going to be a thing. And I will not let that administration gaslight that situation. It will go down in the history books that Trump was on record as saying, it's a couple cases, no big deal. Trump was on record as saying, it's going to go away once it's warm, and it did not. So that having been said, I remember watching that and it stirring up things for me from my past around feeling like I was a kid and there were no adults willing to be adults. And my parents are great people in about a bajillion ways. Of course, I love them. And, they're human and they had failures in parenting. And I will have failures in parenting that I'm sure my daughter will someday talk to me about. And one of the failures in parenting that I saw in both of my parents was that due to their own limitations, certainly not intentionally, I was frequently placed in the position of needing to be an adult when I was still a kid. So when the Trump administration was collectively being childish, what it triggered for me was a sense of there are no adults in the room. So pause now to ask yourself, because this is something you're taking with you. You are taking with you in your roots the resilience that you have gained, but you are also taking with you in your roots the things that got stirred up. Are you a person of color? Have you been part of a target group? And it stirred up pain to watch how our country reacted so divisively to the murder of innocent people of color by the very people who are supposed to protect them. What did it bring up for you this past year to watch the economic ups and downs and uncertainties? How did it trigger old feelings about money from when you were younger? These are all things that are worth examining, and they're hard to examine. But this is part of the reset. And I'm actually going to get to 3 specific things that I think are important for a reset and that I'm actually in the process of undertaking myself. But I want to lay the ground. I want to sow the seeds, so to speak, if we're going to continue with this metaphor. I want to till the soil, cultivate it, really make sure that we are not pretending to plant ourselves in this new pot, but we're bringing along dead soil. So what is it you've walked through in the past year? And if you need to, and of course, if it's safe to, I would encourage you to pause this right now and grab a pen and paper and just finish the sentence over and over and over. What I have walked through in this past year is. What I have walked through in this past year is. Over and over, finish that sentence as many times as necessary. And at no time is it allowed, if we're going to put some parameters on this exercise, to go into, well, but I didn't have it as bad as so-and-so. You had it how you had it, and it was hard for you how it was hard for you. And if you believe in treating yourself and others with kindness and compassion, then you get to tell the story of what this past year was for you in all the places where it was hard. What did you walk through? And all the places where you learned something about yourself or your life or how you want to be. What did you walk through? And as you get clear on that, then you can turn to 3 things in particular that I think can be really helpful when you realize that you need to reset your life. And these are things that you can turn to at any time when you need a reset. Maybe you've hit a fork in the road in your relationship and you're going, I don't know where we're going from here. Maybe you've just gone through a really big transition, like maybe now you're a parent. That's a huge transition. Maybe you've just changed careers. Whatever the thing is that might be calling to you for a reset, these are the 3 areas that I think you need to focus on if you really want to reset your life. First one, you need space. And what do I mean by that? I literally mean you need some kind of space with no devices, with no kids around, with no people around. You need some space. Now, burnout is going to scream so loudly at this one. And burnout, typically is going to show up in one of two ways. It's either going to show up in defeat, like, oh, great, well, there's no way I can get any space, so now I'm screwed. I'm not going to get any space. It's just not going to happen. Or lashing out in anger. This privileged podcast chick, what does she know? Maybe she has access to space, but I've got this and this and this. My God, I roll. Well, you're entitled to your reaction. And just pause and try out. If I absolutely had to get space, like 2 days, 48 hours to myself, away from my usual environment, if possible, that can be harder, I know. But for sure, 48 hours with just solitary alone time and no devices. And if my life depended on that, how would I do it? If I had to do it, how would I do it? Would I get that 48 hours? And yeah, maybe my partner would be mad at me and resentful because they would have to handle the kids. Well, I'll deal with that later. I need the 48 hours. Maybe I'll arrange a swap. Like, hey, I get 48 hours, then you get 48 hours. And if you can't do 48 hours, you can start with an entire morning. But I actually want to push you a little bit and say, get the 48 hours. Because it takes about 24 hours for your somatic system to just chill out. And I'm not speaking scientifically, I suppose, when I say that. I'm not a medical doctor. But just in my experience personally and in working with clients, that it takes about 24 hours for somebody's somatic system to just come down a little bit. So 48 hours, how can you do it? Airbnb, camping, sleeping in your car, out on a trail. I don't know. I don't know what your circumstances are, but how can you get those 48 hours of space to yourself, away from everybody else? And if you live alone and you're like, I already have space, I have way too much space, how can you get out of your usual environment? Why do you need the space? Why am I pushing for that so hard? And why am I pushing for that from the get-go? Because when we are in our habitual environments, our habitual thinking, beliefs, and behaviors will take over. This is one of the reasons why I'm the director of training for the Courageous Living Coach certification. You can learn more about that at teamclcc.com. You've heard me say this a couple times if you've listened to the podcast before. We kick off our program with an in-person retreat. And of course, we couldn't do that in 2020, which was a huge bummer. Or in 2021 rather, but we're looking forward to returning to that. And one of the reasons that we do an in-person retreat, when obviously it would be easier for everybody to just do virtual instruction of some kind, is that we are trying to, there are many reasons why we do it. First of all, just because an in-person retreat is really fun and you get to connect with great people and we get to be like silly together at the same time that we're learning all this great stuff. But another reason is that it resets people in terms of what they're capable of. When you're in your old habitual environment, just imagine this for a minute. Let's just say you do a virtual retreat weekend and like your kids are kind of in the background, or maybe you're getting an email over the weekend from your boss saying, hey, I need you to do this, that, and the other. It's like your attention is still pulled to who you have been and what your career has been. And I love the idea, and I've seen it happen about a bajillion times, where people come to this in-person retreat and they're out of their usual environment, and something in them is going, oh, okay, like, look at this. I've got this. There are people like me out there. That's one of the biggest things we hear when people join our program is like, oh, there are people like me, like heart-centered and willing to be vulnerable, and also like really smart and intelligent and deep thinkers and all of that. And it's also, I'm out of my usual environment. What more is possible for me? So this space question is a big one. And I have seen just the simple act of getting space work miracles in people's lives. I truly have. So 48 hours, that's the first thing. No devices. Because if you get that space and then you're hooked into your email or you're constantly surfing TikTok, it will not have the same results as 48 hours, no devices. And the first 24 hours, like I said, that's when your somatic system is really coming down. And also, that is when you're going to be most tempted to pick up your device. Books, fine. Journaling, fine. Taking lots of long walks, fine. Sketching in a book, fine. Listening to classical music, fine. But no social media, no email, no watching anything, no Netflix, no media, basically. All right, second thing, for a reset for your life, use your values. Do you know what your values are? Maybe that's where we need to start. Do you know what your values are, but you have never, as the parlance goes, operationalized them so that you can actually use them? Or do you know what your values are and you've operationalized them, but you don't actually check in with them on a regular basis, and thus they are not as relevant in your life? So let me break this down a little bit. One, do you know what your values are? And if you don't know what your values are, there are so many great exercises online. You could just go to Google and say values clarification exercises. Most of those exercises just help people to identify what their values are. They don't actually help often with turning them into action, which is what operationalizing them is meant to mean. In corporate culture, operationalizing values is kind of a buzzword. So what does it mean to operationalize values? It means that if you say one of my values is integrity, you understand what the behaviors and beliefs and thoughts are that have you actually practicing integrity, putting it in action. And you are also aware of what it looks like, what the behaviors and beliefs and thoughts are when you are not practicing integrity, when you're getting slippery on that value, or when you're hiding out from that value. So there's knowing your values, there's actually operationalizing them so that you can put them into action. And then there's one more piece, which is, do you have some kind of systematized routine in your life for how you're going to check in on those values? Because knowing it all, and even knowing what it looks like when you are or aren't practicing it, but then never actually doing anything about it, I mean, that's kind of like knowing what you want to eat, going to the grocery store and getting the food and putting it in your pantry, but then not eating it. And then you're hungry. And then you're going, why do I feel so crummy? Well, because you're hungry, because you know it and you have the resources for it and you're just not using it. So use your values during this reset. When you're taking this 48 hours for yourself, take some time to clarify what your values are. If you've done that kind of exercise before, make sure you've operationalized them or put them into action or practice, and you know what it looks like when they are aligned and when they're not aligned. And then ask yourself, what's my system for how I check in on those values? Once a week can probably work. Maybe at the beginning, it might be a check-in with yourself at the end of each day. Did I practice my values today? But using your values in some way is going to guide what needs to happen next with this plant of a life that you are repotting in new soil that you want to give the most possible nutrition and care. And then last, if you're looking for other ways to put some of this into action, I suggest having some kind of a path or process for application to specific areas of your life. And for that, I think the most helpful thing is something like what I have available for Your Courageous Life subscribers, which is the Shift Plan. And you can find it if you're a subscriber. Go to yourcourageouslife.com/begin, and then you will get access to the Your Courageous Life library, where you can then go through the Shift Plan process. And I'll talk a little bit about what that's like. So there are these questions that I ask in different domains. So the first domain is personal growth, fulfillment, how I feel about me. And this is about who you want to be, what it takes to live a more fulfilled life. So I ask this question in the shift plan: would you like to become what? More patient? More confident in your ability to make choices? Gentler with yourself? More easeful? And then as you're writing about the shifts that you want to make, you frame them in the positive. So instead of less stressed out, which is framing in the negative, more easeful, which is framing in the positive. And this is about who you want to be, not stuff you want to do. So in 1 year's time, I'd like to have shifted to a place where I am or I feel in the area of personal growth. What would that be? There's another question that I ask around money and abundance. So in 1 year's time, I'd like to have shifted to a place where what? With money, with abundance. And the question doesn't have to just be about dollar figures, although I think that naming your income is really helpful, naming your desired income. But you could also talk about I desire an abundance of inspiration. That's abundance as well. You could write about how you'd like money to help you to be more of who you already are. I mean, I certainly would love to make more money, in part because I'd love to give more money. I think it's beautiful to give money. It's the gift that gives to all, because it feels so good to give money and know that I've contributed to somebody else's life or what their dream is in some way. So these 3 parts are part of how I'm in the process currently of just going, time to reset my life. I've just moved to a new state. I'm vaccinated. I am starting, in a sense, a new life. And it's kind of sort of a post-pandemic world and kind of sort of not, but I can see the glimmers. And so what is it that I want for my life? What do I want my next act to be? Where do I want to focus my time and my attention? These are the sorts of questions that I'm asking myself, and to guide that, I've needed some time alone. Thankfully, in recent history, I've gotten it. I've had about a week of alone time now because I came out to Colorado before my husband and daughter to set up our new house and unpack and stuff like that. And it's just been delicious getting alone time. And I've been thinking a lot about my values and where I get slippery in honoring those values. And of course, where I am honoring them. And then I'm thinking about different categories of my life in terms of my money, in terms of my health, in terms of my friendships, in terms of my personal relationships, etc. Where do I want to be in all of those areas? What might need to shift? That's why I call it the shift plan, because you're looking at what needs to shift. I hope that these questions help to guide you around a reset. And there's a part of me that wants to also just speak to the fact that these are not quick and easy. And I feel almost a little apologetic about that. Like, sorry guys, sorry it's not like quick and easy. Because I know everybody wants that right now. I can feel that. I can feel how it's like it's been such a slog. And maybe it was, maybe you were already in the red before the pandemic started. And it's been hard. And yet here we are. We can do hard things. We can survive this. We can figure this out. And we can not only be repotted into a new and larger, more aware pot, but we can grow, we can thrive, we can blossom. There are plants that, if they are not repotted into a larger pot, will never blossom fully. And in some cases, they will never thrive, and in other cases, they will even die. So while the process of being repotted, to continue with this metaphor, it's not easy, it's not anybody's first idea of fun, it is in fact necessary. And we can do this, and we can do this together. So So here's to you, and wishing you so much love and care. And thank you so much for listening. If you have been someone who's listened to all 100 episodes of the Your Courageous Life podcast, I hope that you will drop me a line and tell me what your favorite episodes have been, actually, because I'd be very curious to know what those are. And I wish you love and I wish you care. And here's to us, and here's to new beginnings. All right, that's today's podcast. Thank you so much for listening to today's episode. You know you can continue the work and the fun if you want to. Head on over to yourcourageouslife.com/begin and become a Your Courageous Life subscriber, because as soon as you sign up, you get access to an entire library of worksheets and audios and other bonuses. And of course, you'll be receiving more courage in your inbox. And who wouldn't love that? You can learn more about the Courageous Living Coach certification at teamclcc.com. You can get the Courage Habit at your local bookseller, on Amazon, wherever you like. We can even connect on social media. I'm on Facebook at Your Courageous Life. So look for facebook.com/Your Courageous Life. And I'm on Instagram as Kate Courageous. And I'd love to connect with you on Instagram. So here's to you, using these courageous tools in your life and creating a real ripple effect of good. And again, thanks so much for listening. I love it that you're here.